As you know, today's topic is state and Nadus in medieval Karnataka. So I had some interest. So, because I have been teaching, in fact, I studied also the Nadus, the pet subject of for Buttonstein. So Buttonstein, of course, now I think people are not studying much of Buttonstein, but he has raised some important questions. So it's very important to study Buttonstein's argument regarding the Chola state. So, applying it or maybe uh, to enter into kind of dialogue with Buttonstein and also various other scholars. In the case of Karnataka, so that is what I will be doing. I will be trying to discuss. And of course, Buttonstein's segmentation theory created a lot of debate among scholars. Yes, you must be aware of that. So, various historians, either they supported or they questioned it. And some of the scholars have taken a very neutral stand. People like, for scholars like Champak Lakshmi, for example, she has taken a very neutral stand, saying that this is neither this nor that. So we don't have much information, or still we are in a state of flux, and so we have to study more sources. So there is a lot of debate among scholars. So Nadus become important. Nadus take center stage in Butterstein's scheme of things, because of talking about segmented state theory and trying to say that there are many segments in the Chola state. So it was not centralized state. So that is his basic premise, basic argument. But the question is whether can we say that throughout a history of an empire, can you say this is it? Can you say this is either centralized or decentralized? So some point of time it may be centralized, some point of time it may be decentralized. Some point of time it may be this feudal also, because as shown by Noboru Karashima. So later Cholas we find emergence of feudal state. So we have all these scholars, Karashima, Subbarayalu, discussing the Nadus, the importance of the Nadus, and trying to analyze the nature of the Nadus in the context of Tamil Nadu. So can we discuss the Nadus in the context of Karnataka is the question. Of course, we find reference to Nadus in Karnataka also. So various scholars have studied. So there is a study on the Nadus. So there is a PhD thesis also on Nadus. And also, the pioneering study by Dikshit, G.S. Dikshit, if you know, if you are a student of Karnataka history. So we find the work of Dikshit, where he is trying to discuss the Nadus, various aspects of the Nadus. But of course, this was a very old work when Buttonstein had not emerged on the scene, so he was not aware of all these different theoretical aspects. But we find some of his arguments are most relevant even today. So we'll start with the study of Dikshit and various other scholars who have studied in the context of Tamil Nadu and also in the context of Karnataka. So I'll be discussing some of the historiographical aspects, plus I will be discussing some of references to Nadus in the inscriptions. So what change emerges in the context of Karnataka when compared with Tamil Nadu with reference to Nadu. So this is the main concern for me today. So let us look at some of the important aspects. So G.S. Dikshit, Y. Subbarayalu, Buttonstein, Noboru Karashima, and Keshavan Viruthat. So these scholars have studied regarding Nadus in South India, particularly in Tamil Nadu. So if you look at Tamil region, so we find Cholas and various scholars. Subbarayalu, as you know, he wrote the book on Cholas. Buttonstein wrote the Peasant State and Society in South India. Karashima's work mostly based on inscriptions. Very, very important work on the Cholas, and also later he wrote about the whole of South India also. So of course, he did not study much of Kannada inscriptions, but mostly we find Tamil inscriptions. Karashima was able to provide a lot of information because it's basically based on the primary sources. And the work of Keshavan Velu that political structure of South India. So it also discusses actually the feudal state, that is Cholas as a feudal state. So argument of Keshavan Velu that where he has questioned the argument of Buttenstein. It's very critical and of Buttenstein. So he has questioned Buttenstein. So we find a major debate emerging among the historians, among the scholars, regarding the nature of Chola state, regarding the Nadus, what is the function of Nadus basically, how the state was trying to control Nadus and not control Nadus, how the Nadus were able to maintain their autonomy. So all these are the important questions, important issues that emerge in this context. Now, we find that scholars, they thought initially that Nadus as a monolithic structures, structures, in the sense that there is no change in the Nadus. So there is, the dynamism was not appreciated and accepted by most of the historians. So they don't consider. So they did not consider the Nadus and their variants. The various aspects of the Nadus. Like sometimes they were autonomous, sometimes they were not autonomous, sometimes they were controlled by the king. But we find that the scholars the importance of the work of Buttenstein is that scholars have begun to appreciate the importance of the Nadu. So they understand the study of the Nadu. It is not only villages, as discussed by Buttenstein, that mostly the scholars like Nilakanta Shastri discussed about the villages, but not the Nadu. So now we find that after Subarayulu wrote about Nadu, so Buttenstein also began to write about Nadus. So we find that Nadus become important to study for historians. So we find Karashima, where he argued about the Brahmana villages. So while Nilakanta Shastri also discussed about Brahmana villages, where we find for Nilakanta Shastri villages as more important than the Nadus. But then we find Karashima shows that, at least in the later times, we find Brahmana villages emerging as important because of support given by the state. So it is not only Nadus, but Brahmanical villages also become important, as argued by Karashima. While Nadus comprising a lot of peasant owners, so we find the peasant owners, the landholders, what is called Vellanvagai, that is what we can find in the case of Tamil region. So we find that the Nadus in the context of Tamil region becomes important for the scholars to study. Now, we find the scholars, they try to discuss, try to study the segmented state, as I mentioned, and also various empirical issues in the form of inscriptions, in the form of documents, records. So they were trying to analyze nature of Nadus. Of course, Subarayulu, as we mentioned, he is known for the collection of inscriptions and study of the large numbers of inscriptions and trying to find pattern in these inscriptions. Whether is there any pattern? Is there any kind of support that we can find in the case of segmented state theory? Now, basically, they study about the state and the Nadus, that is the rural organization, we can say. So the state, whether it was trying to control the Nadus or not, whether the state accepted the autonomy of the Nadus, and either they accept central role of the state or they reject the same. So in the sense that some of the works they try to analyze, they try to say that the central government or the state was, or the king was trying to control the Nadu, so by using various methods, where it would mean that the state was actually trying to control the Nadus, and also on the other hand, we find that some scholars say that the Nadus were able to maintain their autonomy. So there are two various views which we can find in this context. So in this, so we find in the case of Karnataka also we have the Nadu. So can we apply the particular concepts, particular theories, and also can we find any the sources that we find in the case of Tamil Nadu regarding the Nadus? Are there Nadus in Karnataka, or are the Nadus of Karnataka are same or somewhat different from the Tamil region? So these are the questions that emerge. So I would like to say that, of course, Nadus also exist in Karnataka, but they are not the same as Tamil region. Or we find that the state, the relationship with the Nadus is very much apparent in the case of Karnataka rather than in the Tamil region. So that is what I would be arguing and showing that the state played a very important role in the making of the Nadus in the case of Karnataka. Of course, Tamil Nadu also, we have this particular evidence as we find in the case of in the writings of Karashima and also Champakalakshmi. They have discussed regarding the Nadus, regarding the kings conferring the title of the Nattar on the Nadu. So this is very much apparent. So which means that the state had some kind of connection with the Nadus. It's not that state did not have any kind of relationship with the Nadu. So as argued by Buttenstein. So autonomy thesis also can be questioned. So Buttenstein's autonomy thesis is saying that the Nadus are independent, they are autonomous, and the state actually did not have any kind of power over or control over the Nadus. So this also can be questioned in this way. Now, we find that you talk about Nadus as autonomous institutions. Does it mean that Nadus can survive without support of the state? No. So the state support was essential for the Nadus because without state support, the Nadus may decline. If the state uses its military and power and attacks the Nadus, then Nadus cannot manage because Nadus won't have the particular capacity to withstand this particular attack by the state. So this is very important. And we find that state attempted to try to control the Nadus in Karnataka. And also in the Tamil region, we have this evidence, as already mentioned. And also the state was trying to construct particular institutions in the form of, say, Valanadus, for example. So we find different Valanadu was another revenue organization which had the power to collect taxes when compared with the Nadus, because Nadus also had the power to collect taxes. So along with the Nadus, we find the state creating particular institutions to reduce or to impose the power of the state over the Nadus. So all this evidence is available. But you should also try to understand the Nadus in Tamil region and Karnataka region, Kannada regions. Because they are not the same, so there are some differences, some changes that emerge in the case of Kannada regions. Even though all parts of Karnataka, you don't find reference to the name Nadu. So Nadu name also may change. I mean, the particular term Nadu, which is being used in the form of a revenue unit or in the form of agrarian unit or in the form of administrative unit. So this meaning also changes in the context of Karnataka. Because we find they may use different words like maybe Khanda, in a Khanda, for example, Nagara Khanda, for example. So in northern part of Karnataka. Or maybe use of the term like Vishaya, for example. Vishaya is equivalent to Nadu. So this is what scholars have tried to discuss. Now, in the context of Karnataka, we find Dikshit made very important pioneering study regarding the Nadus, as I mentioned already. We find that he was one of the earliest historians of South India to understand the importance of Nadus, and also he wrote a book on local self-government, as you must be aware of it. So we find that in this local self-government, he tried to analyze Nadus functioning, how they used to operate, how they used to function, and how there is autonomy. So autonomy also he discusses. Perhaps he was one of the earliest scholars to discuss about autonomy of the local institutions. But he did not have the advantage of the modern historians, modern scholars, other recent scholars, because now they have the theories like Buttenstein segmented state theory, assumptions of Buttenstein, as you find the theories and concepts and these ideas. So all these were not available to Dikshit. So you don't find analysis of segmented state and all those kinds of theories. But then we find that Dikshit made a study of most of the inscriptions of the Nadus, and he has provided the information regarding most of these records where they mention about the Nadus and also their functioning. So this particular aspect has been discussed, taken care of by Dikshit, which is very important work for us to begin with regarding the Nadus. In Tamil Nadu, we find the study by Subarayulu. So yesterday also some scholars were talking about Subarayulu. So participants of this course, so they are aware of Subarayulu. Subarayulu wrote Cholas on the Chola state. He talks about land revenue system. He talks about the Nadus there in Cholas, and he has shown the autonomy of the Nadus. But he does not agree totally with the argument of Buttenstein. So because he finds that in some cases, the Chola state was trying to control the Nadu. So we have the Chola kings, the great kings like Rajaraja the Great and Rajaraja, then Rajendra the First and Kulotunga the First. So these three were the important kings of the Cholas, if you look at it. And so it will be difficult to accept that they were not able to have control over the various provinces, various territories of the state. So some Chola kings were able to control the Nadus and some Chola kings were not able to control the Nadus. So that is how I think we can look at it in the context of the state formation theory also. Now, another important scholar, as I mentioned, is Noboru Karashima, the Japanese historian who came to India and he learned Tamil and he studied all these different inscriptions, different records, and he was trying to understand the relationship between the Nadu and the state, and he suggested that the Gaudas of Karnataka are similar to Vellalas of Tamil Nadu. So we find Vellalas of Tamil Nadu are the landlords and also the peasants. So they were the landowners and also, so we find that Vellalas enjoy very important position in society. So Gaudas in the same way, enjoying an important position in society in Karnataka society. So we find reference to this study of some of the terms. So even Tamil historians also begin to show interest in some of the terms in Karnataka, because we find Karnataka is something which one cannot ignore, because of the particular kingdoms like Badami Chalukyas, Western Chalukyas, Hoysalas, and Vijayanagara. So in this context, it is difficult to ignore the Karnataka as a region for the study of the Nadus, to study the nature of the state. So in this kind of attempt has been made by some of the scholars. We find in the Tamil region a major development was Buttenstein wrote this work, as I mentioned, that there was a major debate among historians of South India when he wrote. So in fact, there's a lot of commotion, lot of arguments among the scholars whether we can accept the argument of Buttenstein. So, but some Western historians seem to accept or support the argument of Buttenstein. And he also tried to study Karnataka region, but he said that he is more concerned with southern Karnataka rather than northern Karnataka, because southern Karnataka has, which is more closer to Cholas, that is the Tamil region. So, because we find the Cholas also rules some part of southern Karnataka for some particular period. So we find this evidence of Chola influence on Karnataka also, because we find there are many Tamil settlements in Karnataka. If you look at Bangalore, Mysore, we have some evidence of Chola invasion and the conquest of some of the regions, and also Chola settlements in these regions. So we find also Tamil inscriptions in Karnataka. Now, Buttenstein says that northern Karnataka, he is not much concerned, because northern Karnataka has a different culture, he says. So he did not study much of northern Karnataka, but southern Karnataka, of course, yes. The Hoysala period, the Hoysalas, Gangas, he tried to study. And he tried to analyze the nature of Nadus in South India, and also in Karnataka. So we find some important contribution made by Buttenstein, and so he was trying to analyze. He was trying to implement or practice or to impose the idea of a segmented state in the case of Karnataka, also along with the Tamil region. Of course, he says that all pre-modern states are segmented states. In the case of India, he says there is no state which is a centralized state. So this is the major argument of Buttenstein. Now, he assumed that all Nadus are same. So there's a uniform pattern of the Nadus, and he says that there was Nadus had a spokesperson called Nattar. He says Nattar is the spokesperson of the Nadus. And Nadus having their assembly called Nadu. So again, it's called Nadu. So Nadu assembly was there. So we find they used to discuss various issues in this assembly. So according to him, the Nadus are natural creations. So they must, because naturally evolved kind of institutions, that is particular units of administration, and having the large numbers of indigenous ethnic groups like Tamil peasants. So we find you may talk about Vellalas, you may talk about what is called we mentioned about Vellanvagai. So we find the particular particular peasant groups we can find here, or the land which is owned by the peasants. So basically, we find that they're peasant proprietors. Basically, the Nadu members actually they were the peasants, and also they used to manage their own land. And for Buttenstein, Nadus represent the real sovereignty. So they're the real rulers for him, while the Chola monarchs symbolize the ritual sovereignty, he says. So ritual sovereignty and real sovereignty are the two important concepts which he has brought in, and I was trying to say that so Nadus had greater power than actually than the state itself. So we find that so he would assume that the same in the case of Karnataka also, because he says Vijayanagara also has a secondary state. Maybe a lack of Kannada language and lack of the study of the Kannada script and all those things. So he was not able to do much of contribution in the case of Karnataka history. But then we also find reference to some of the use of some secondary sources in Bertenstein's secondary state theory. And he also assumed that in Karnataka also, as we mentioned, that there was secondary state. So that is his assumption that we can find here. But we should know that state is not a static unit. It is not a unchanging unit. So it always changes. So over a period of time, change takes place. History is always history of change. If you don't record, or if you don't find the change in the history, so there is no point in writing history actually. So if you go on concerning history as a monolithic unit, as if there is nothing happened, there is no change. So there's no point in writing history, I think. And we find the scholars like B.D. Chattopadhyay and Herman Kulke, they studied state formation as a continuous and never-ending process. So state formation where, there are various phases of state formation, where Herman Kulke talks about early state and kingdom and imperial state. So we find that various stages of state formation. So, we can study this in the context of Chalukyas, Western Chalukyas, and also in the context of say we can study even Rashtrakutas, for example. So we find that it is not that all the empires, the so-called empires, so they were empires to begin with. So it is a slow process, gradual process. So initially they are small states, then they expand their empire, their territories, and over a period of time they're able to expand over the larger areas also. So we find that is how the empires emerge. So that is how Rashtrakutas expanded up to in Maharashtra. So they went to North India, as you know. So they fought with the North Indian kings also. So we find that's how there was expansion of the kingdom. So kingdom as a dynamic unit. Nadu, which is found within the kingdom, also is a dynamic unit. We cannot say that Nadus were static unit and there is no change in the Nadus. And we find that Nadus have also experienced some kind of transition, some kind of change because of transition from pre-state to the early state to the state society. So when the state emerges, a state society emerges, so we find the transition in the Nadus also. So in that case, in this kind of a transitional state, we find that there is a transformation of state from early to mature state. In the same way, we find Nadus also experience transformation. So this is what one can suggest based on the state formation theories. Now, while making up the Nadus, how Nadus have been made? So what is the process, or what factors went into making up the Nadus? Now, Cholas of Tamil country, they emerged as a large empire only in the 10th century. So we talk about Cholas. So, the general trend is to say that, Cholas is a large empire, so they were there. But they were not large empire always. 8th, 9th century AD, no, they were not very large kingdom or large empire. So we find as long as the Rashtrakutas were there, the Cholas could not emerge. So we find 10th century CE, so Rashtrakuta suddenly declined. So then there was emergence of Cholas in the south. Now, also, we find the emergence of the important kings like Ajaraja, we have mentioned, and also other kings. So they were able to expand the Chola territory. So, they expanded to a great extent. So there is no doubt about that. And it is, we can say that in the initial years of the Cholas, that is the medieval Cholas we're talking about, not the ancient Cholas, that we find Nadus would have obtained some kind of autonomy, and that would have continued in the later times also. Does not mean that the state was not able to control the Nadus. The state had all the particular apparatus to control the Nadus. So you cannot say the state did not have the capacity to control the Nadus. So that would not be acceptable. Now, we find the Chola state transformed. So there was a change because of expansion of states, and also they had to collect a lot of revenue. So because we find that they had to maintain such a large empire, and also they have to fight wars. So that's very important for Cholas. And Patrician, of course, argues that the Cholas did not have a standing army. So, but we have this evidence that this Cholas did have the standing army. They did recruit soldiers and also they had some soldiers from Karnataka also. So, so Braille also mentions that Cholas, obtaining soldiers from Karnataka also. Now, we find this led to the expansion of agrarian settlements, trade and urbanization. So trade and urbanization were given importance. That Ayavale 500, for example, Ainu River, what they call Ainu River. So Ainu River went along with the Cholas wherever they went. They went to Ceylon, they went to Southeast Asia. So we find all these regions they visited, they went. So we find that the Cholas wanted to increase their revenue. So they took the help of the Nadus, they took the help of agrarian settlements, they took the help of Brahmanas. They took the help of the traders to expand their particular revenue. And this situation we can find maybe up to say 13th century when the Cholas collapsed, declined. So we find then there was emergence of Hoysalas and Vijayanagara in South India later. So we find that. We find this is the history of the Cholas, where we find there are various changes taking place in a Chola empire. So it is not a single, not a static kind of empire, but there were many changes happening in the Cholas. Now, we find that the creation of Brahmadeyas as an important aspect of the Chola period. So we find Brahmana settlements, Brahmadeyas, and we have many inscriptions regarding these Brahmadeyas. So they had their assembly called Sabha, and they used to decide various issues in that Sabha. So we find Brahmadeyas could counter the Nadus. So it is not that Nadus were only autonomous, but then we find various other institutions also emerging. So they could challenge authority of the Nadus. Now, we find that, so there was emergence of various segments, you can say. So Nadu, Brahmadeya, Nagara, temples, Nagaram. So Nagaram as a market center, as you know. So we find that urban centers, urbanization taking place. So various segments we can find. It's not only Nadus, but also various other segments also. So they would challenge authority of the Nadus. So it is not that Nadus always they were autonomous, but then we find that there were some other institutions also which could challenge authority of the Nadus. It would mean that there was no single institution as dominant authority. So we cannot say Nadus as dominant when Buttenstein says that Nadus as the real sovereignty. But we also find the Brahmanas are there, Brahmanical temples are there, temples are there, and also Brahmana settlements you can find, and even this Nagarams are also important. So we find urban centers also become important. So we find that that the Cholas were able to take the help of Brahmanas and to take the help of the temples, and also various people who believed in Bhakti movement. So taking the help of these people, it was possible for the state to control the people of the Nadus without the use of force. Now, even existence of autonomous units also does not indicate the weakness of the state. The state can allow autonomous units also in the form of Nadus. So the state can allow the autonomy of the Nadus. So the kings were mostly, they were fighting wars basically. So whether Nadus were their major competitors, we don't know actually. So, in that case, the state of course had a lot of resources. They could amass a lot of money, a lot of financial resources, and if there's a need, they can even suppress the Nadus. So in this case, the kings were bothered mostly about fighting their wars with their enemies. For example, the Cholas fighting against Chalukyas, as we know, and later the Hoysalas. So we find that Western Chalukyas they had to fight, and also various other kingdoms. Pandyas were also there. So they had their own problems which they had to solve. So we find that they had to expand their empire. So the Cholas under Rajaraja and Rajendra Chola, they went all over South Asia. So they went also Southeast Asia. So they had many other issues which they had to solve. So not only Nadus which are important for them, but we find that at some point of time a weak state also can emerge because of decline of the state. In the case of Cholas, we find that the state had declined. So in that case, we can say there is emergence of feudalism. So feudal authority also can emerge in form of samantas, these kind of people who would village headmen and also land grant beneficiaries such as Brahmanas can emerge as the feudal lords, as discussed by R. Sharma. So we find at some point of time it is possible that there is emergence of the feudal authorities. As argued by Karashima also, who said that in the later part of Cholas, we find there's the feudalism in the Chola Empire. Now, if you look at structure of the Nadus, what is the nature of structure of the Nadus? Buttenstein gives the impression that the Nadus as autonomous institutions, as we were saying, but they existed only in the case of Tamil region, but not in Karnataka. So this assumption is that Tamil Nadus were more autonomous than in Karnataka, but now we find scholars today are questioning even autonomy of the Nadus in Tamil Nadu. So, to what extent they were autonomous? Of course, they were autonomous, but to what extent they were autonomous? Whether the king tried to control them? Of course, yes. So in that case, what is the impact of the nature of state in the case of Tamil region is a question. Now, also, whether Nadus were immune to external interference, we don't know actually. I mean, of course, we have some evidence regarding this. Now, so because we find that the state did try to interfere in the affairs of the Nadus, maybe in the form of Valanadu, as we mentioned, and also creating some other institution like Brahmadeyas, as we mentioned. And we find the increased reference to Nadus in inscriptions. So, they also show the importance of the Nadus for the state authorities. The state wanted to control the Nadus. State depended on the Nadus to centralize the resources. Karashim also mentions about Brahmadeyas in the Chola state. So we find Brahmadeyas as another important institution that emerged. So Nadus were not the only institution that we can find in the Chola state. Butterstein asserts that Nadus established in Periya Nadus, under the leadership of Periyanata. So Periyanadus. So Nadus are this. So then we find he says there are Periyanadus because the Nadus wanted they wanted to assert their domination by creating some Periyanadus, which are the assimilation of various Nadus. So in the case of Karnataka, he talks about Mahanadu. He says that Mahanadu was the counterpart of Periyanadu, he says. But that is not exactly correct, because we find that in Karnataka, Mahanadus did not result in decline of the state authority, while in Tamil countries we find Periyanadus affected the state authorities. In fact, it is said that one of the reasons for the fall of the Cholas was the Periyanadus, because the Periyanadus did not cooperate with the state authority, and also we find chieftains emerging, and they also, they did not cooperate with the state. So, but in the case of Karnataka, so we find Mahanadus comprising the state, comprising agrarian, craft, and itinerant organization like Ayavale 500. So we find that Ayavale 500 is a part of Mahanadu. So, Mahanadus is basically, it is not an agrarian institution. It was basically a trade organization. And the Mahanadus continue to exist in the 17th century also, as we find in the inscriptions. Now, we find that Periyanadu and Mahanadu look similar in terms of language. If you look at the words, if you play with the words, then they look similar. But Periyanadu, according to Butterstein, was amalgamation of Nadu. So it would function the functions performed by the Nadus earlier, but you don't find that Mahanadu are the same as Nadus. Now, we find in the case of Karnataka, Nadus did send their people to Mahanadu. Representatives were sent to Mahanadu. But we cannot say that Mahanadu was exactly the amalgamation of the Nadus, as we find many trade guilds, traders, and all those things. So we cannot say the Mahanadus were the same as Periyanadu. So we find that Mahanadu was a general assembly comprising the traders, the trade guilds, agriculturists. And rise of Mahanadu is associated with the emergence of the mature state, we can say. So we find, along with the state formation, along with the expansion of the state, and along with the emergence of the empire in the case of Karnataka, so we find there was emergence of Mahanadu also. Dikshit mentions that Nadus formed themselves into large Nadus like Nalku Nadu, for example. Nalku Nadu is 4 Nadus. So he talks about which represent actually amalgamation Nadus, we can say. So it is not Mahanadu, which is amalgamation Nadus, but it is 4 Nadus, or Nalku Nadus, which is the amalgamation of Nadus, we can say, in the case of Karnataka. Now, important question is raised by Keshav Vilutat regarding the Nadus and also village administration in Karnataka. He talks about Urodaya. He says the Urodaya is, that means the lord of the Ur. Odaya means lord, and Ur is the village or the hamlet, or we can say settlement, we can say. It's a term found in the Kannada inscriptions. So, and then he says that there are many, but not one Urodaya. So there are many Urodayas. So he asked the question, why is that there are so many Urodayas? So he's, we are not able to find this answered in the work of Dikshit. So Vilutat tried to say that. So what is the meaning of having many lords of the Ur? And he says that Tamil Nadu and Karnataka is somewhat similar in this case, because we also find in the context of Tamil Nadu there are many particular Nadu members. So Urode we can compare with the context of Tamil Nadu essays. Now, it's possible that somewhere there were members of the same village having the similar status. So we find there many Urodayas are there, and there were members of various urs meeting in the Nadu assembly, and we also we find as we have seen that there are many members, many Urodayas. So it's more than one Urodaya is there. How can it be more than one Urodaya is asking? Because Odaya, so it's Odaya of the Ur. So in that case, how there are so many Urodayas? So we find that in the 13th century inscription, we find reference to several Urodayas. And they were praised for the temple construction and maintenance activities. So in this case, Urodaya is also mentioned as the writer of the inscription. Subrayulu talks about Urodaya. He says that there was existence of many village headmen. He says that the Uru members were primarily possessors of the village, that is a village land. And secondarily, they were, of course, the leading people of their villages. That means that there are multiple headmen in a village. So it's not one headman, but many headmen. And it can be argued that they were the heads of respective landholding households, he says. So he talks about having many village headmen. Basically, we find that they are the landlords. Various households are important. So we are having many Urodayas. So it is quite possible, as we find in the case of Tamil Nadu, so in the case of Karnataka, so we have many Urodayas. And in one inscription of 13th century, we find 12 Gaundas, village headmen. And so we find 12 Gaundas are the village headmen. So Gaundas is a village headman. They constitute a circle called Hanneredu, Tappadiya, Kurumbetta. So that is a particular circle that is mentions of made by these 12 Gaundas. They also had the leader called Sindhagaunda. Pardon? Yeah, Sindhagaunda. So we find that there are many villages of the rural settlements. They worked under the chief headmen. So we find reference to this kind of having many village headmen in the context of Karnataka. So the Ur sent its members to the Nadu. So we find that they used to attend the Nadu assemblies. And we also find reference to Gaunda, Ur Gaunda, Nada, Nadgaunda. So we find reference to this kind of various terms that is found in the inscription. So Gaunda is a member of the village. And so we find that various hierarchy of Gaundas also we can say. And some of them were peasants, it's possible, and some of them were dominant peasants. So some were having a lot of wealth and a lot of land also. So that is what you can say in this context. Urgamunda is the leader of the village, having a substantial amount of land. Nadgamunda was a person designated as the leader of the Nadu. So we find the Urgamunda is there, Nadgamunda is there. So Urgamunda is the leader of the village. Nadgamunda is the person who is to lead the Nadu. So he is the leader of the Nadu, we can say. But we find that he had to deal with the Nadu and the state officials. So in the context of Karnataka, so we find there is Nadgamunda, and also we find Urgamunda. So we find various connotations, various meanings of these particular terms have been tried to be explained here. And this also indicates there was certification among the Urodayas, who are termed variously as Gamunda, Gaunda, and Gauda. Of course, all these terms refer to the same thing actually. But Dinakar Desai and Bidi Chattopadhyay shows that because Bidi Chattopadhyay also studied the Nadus of Karnataka. So he says that Gaundas, we find there are two kinds of Gaundas. One is Praja Gaunda and there is Prabhu Gaunda. So two kinds of Gaundas are mentioned, Praja and Prabhu. If you know, Praja means common person and Prabhu means, almost dominant people, you can say that they're the ruling class. So we find two kinds of Gaundas we can find in the context of Karnataka. Praja Gaunda was ordinary peasant and the supervision of Prabhu Gaunda. So we find Praja Gaunda is there and it's controlled by Prabhu Gaunda. And we find in this, the Prabhu Gaunda had the authority of Mahasamantas. He's kind of Mahasamanta. So we find it's a feudal authority. So he's very close to the state and the king. So we find that there was emergence of two kinds of Gaundas. As we find the Praja Gaunda and Prabhu Gaunda as the two important Gaundas here. Now, Gaunda was a person who possessed some amount of land. So Gauda, you say, Gauda or Gaunda or Gamunda. So is a person of authority. Is a person who possesses some amount of land, if not more, if not a large amount of land. Prabhu Gamunda was the leader of the Gaundas, as we mentioned that. However, one may not find a person like Nattar in Karnataka. So there's no reference to a spokesperson like Nattar. So that is missing in the case of Karnataka. But then we find reference to Gaundas and also the Prabhu Gaundas. So those people can be leaders of the Nadus or not Gaunda, we can say. State in Karnataka took interest in the appointment of Nadu officials. So we find that state is controlling the Nadus. It's very directly, it's very apparent that the state was trying to control the Nadus. So the state took measures to protect its interest as against the Nadu. So we find that Karnataka, we have this evidence that how the state was trying to control the Nadus, and we also find Gaundas in the urban context, not only in the rural context but also in the urban context. In the towns also we find reference to Gaundas. So there is some change in the case of Karnataka. So it is not exactly as we find in the case of Tamil Nadu, because Nadus are mostly in the rural, found in the rural context in the Tamil region. Now, Dinakar Desai is another scholar who has worked on the Nadus, who has written some articles. So in that, he has tried to analyze the Nadu. He said the Nadu was a district, and Khanda and the Nadu are the same. So they have similar meanings. So Nadu for him is a district, and also is reference to this territory of Nagarkanda. Nagarkanda is mentioned in the 12th century inscription of the Western Chalukyas. He says that this Khanda is actually Nadu. So he's talking about Nagar Nadu basically. So we find this idea of Nadu is also found in the context of Karnataka. And he also argues that Gaunda and Urodaya, so they have similar meanings. Gaunda and Urodaya has similar meanings, he says. And in the early sources, one can find reference to Urodaya, and gradually the term Gaunda replaced. So initially we find that Urodaya was there, so then there is emergence of Gaunda. And meaning of Urodaya is the Vadaya, or the lord of the Ur of the settlement. Urodaya as the Vadaya, or the lord of the Ur of the settlement. So Gaunda means the lord of the village, he says. So we find that so in that sense, Gaunda and Urodaya, they become similar. They are almost the same. And there were many Gaundas, which the question was raised even by Keshanuru, that as we've seen. So we have this evidence of many Gaundas, so it is possible that means that there are many Urodayas also. So when you say Gaunda, it is Urodaya only. And it implies a person who was conferred the leadership position among other landowners. So we find that the emergence of this village headman kind of authorities, which we can find in the context of these villages. Dinakar Desai also shows, talks about Nala Prabhu or Nada Prabhu. So Nala Prabhu at the head of the Nadu. He maintained a close contact with the king, as he requested the one Nala Prabhu, in one case he requested for tax exemption for a temple, and the king accepted the demand. So we find that the particular Gaunda, the Nala Prabhu is trying to obtain support of the state or support of the king for tax concession given to the temple. So we find that attempt made by the particular Gaunda's particular Nada Prabhu, to maintain close contact with the king. So this is one evidence for the state control of the Nadus, which become important in the case of Karnataka. In one case, we find that there was the death of Nala Prabhu, and this position was given to the wife of the deceased person. So his wife was given this position of Nala Prabhu, which means that if you look at female were also given sometimes these positions when there is no other way. So we find that this allowed the family to dominate the local administration. So the king was very much perhaps that connected with that family. So he thought that he will continue with the same family, and that is why he appointed his wife as the Nada Prabhu. Nada Gamunda also had to deal with other officials like Nada Setti. We find Nada Rajaguru is mentioned, Nada Seneboa is mentioned, Nada Hegade is mentioned. So we find Nada Setti in the is a trader, Nada Rajaguru as an advisor in terms of various aspects, based on the Dharma Shastra books and other things. Nada Seneboa is very important in the administration of the Nadus. Nada Hegade, as you know, is an important official in the Nadu. So maintenance of administration of the Nadu. So we find various kinds of officials in the Nadu. So these are all called Nadu officials, we can say. As we have seen that these are elite members of society. So we find that Nada Gaunda is also mentioned here. Dinakar Desai also talks about more than one Gaunda or Urodaya in the village. So it is not one Gaunda. There are many Urodayas. And he reasons that in the case of large villages, it was not possible for one Urodaya to manage the administration. So why there are many Urodayas? because you cannot manage administration in a large village, by one Urodaya. So there's a need for more than one Urodaya. So or maybe sometimes you may have 10 Urodayas and many Urodayas also. Also, we can find the council of Urodayas. So in that case, this particular committee of Urodayas, kind of oligarchy, we can find, they were able to manage the administration. So that is what we can see. So that's why we find that there are large numbers of Urodayas. In some cases, in some cases there may be one government also, because we find it's a small village, it's a very small village, they can manage with one government also. But there are many cases where we find there are more than one Urodayas. In some cases, we find hamlets were controlled by Gurodayas. They formed one unit of administration. In such cases, we find several governors looking after administration of the Ur. So we find that the several governors. So they were looking after the Ur. So that is important for the administration of the Ur. Then Prabhu governors we mentioned. We also find Praja Kamundas. So Praja Kamundas are, we have mentioned as the subjects. So they also form their own organization to protect their interest, because Prabhu Kamundas, had their own organization. So they are the large landlords. So Praja Kamundas are small landlords, we can say. And we find a dateless inscription mentions 6 Prajagaudas of Eduguru decided to construct a tank and give a land grant. So we find reference to how Prajagamundas also they were trying to protect their interest in this particular Nadus, in this particular the Urs and all those regions. So we find that Prabhu Gaundas and there are Prajagaundas. So both were trying to assert their importance. Prajagaudas, as the peasant proprietors, they had emerged as important, and also they used to participate in land transactions. So they were acting as a witness in this particular land sale and purchase of the land. This is mentioned in inscriptions. And we also find they mention the names of Prajagaudas. Names, the personal names of the Prajagaudas are also mentioned. So that is very interesting, is very important here. We find the Hoysala King Veeraballala, his inscription mentions the grant by the Gaudas, peasant proprietors, to a Brahmana settlement. So when you say Gaudas, there can be different various kinds of Gaudas. So some are rich and some are not so rich. But then we find that they form a kind of organization. And the grant mentions the Prabhu Gaudas of the 14 Nadus is mentioned. So Nadus is very clearly mentioned in this particular case. So we find that in Karnataka also there are Nadus, like as we find in the case of Tamil Nadu. Nada Gaudas, we find they had occupied the position of the Prabhus. So the Prabhus were the chieftains. So we find that the Nadagaudas were important, and consequently Nadagaudas obtained very important position in the state. A state also worked closely with the Nadagaudas because they are considered as the Prabhus. So we find Prabhus as chieftains, and Prabhus are dominant rural people. So they were the head of the villages. So we find that in this case, this particular Nadagaudas also become important. So we find reference to Nadus and also, but Karnataka has its own way of looking at Nadus. We also find the assembly of the Prabhu Gaudas of various Nadus. So they met in an assembly to decide various issues that could affect them. Hello. Yeah, there was some problem. Internet was gone actually. Okay, I will continue. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yes. I will continue with the discussion here. So various kinds of Gaudas, as we mentioned, Prabhu Gaudas, Gaundas. So we find that the Gaudas and Prabhu Gaundas granted land. So most dominating Prabhus became Mahaprabhus. We also find different Mahaprabhus in this context, in the rural context. So we find that they obtain important position in the local administration. Another inscription also refers to institution of Prabhu Thana. So one can compare with the Gaudike and Nayaka Thana. Anybody would like to say anything? Hello? Anybody would like to say anything? I hear something, but maybe.
Ramani,
Yeah. So let me continue. So let me continue. So So I think this already I've discussed. Now, Nadus dependence on the state. So I will come to the last part of my lecture. So I will just wind up discussing these particular aspects. So we find that Karnataka inscriptions provide some evidence regarding royal intervention in the Nadu administration by appointing Nadu officials. So we find Nadu officials were appointed by the kings. So in the absence of the state or the decline of state power, the trade guilds along with other corporate agencies, they obtain the right to appoint the leader of the Nadu. So we find the Nadus always wanted some kind of external authority. In the case of Karnataka, at least, it's not in the case of Tamil Nadu. So the kings appointing the leaders of the Nadus. So we find that so there was some kind of royal intervention in the case of Karnataka. That is what we can find here. So in that case, so we see that state and the Nadus, they work together. So we cannot say that the Nadus are exactly autonomous institutions in the case of Karnataka. So what is explicit in Karnataka becomes implicit in Tamil region. So what we mean is that in Tamil region, the autonomy or the particular state control of the Nadus is not very apparent. But if you look at sources, if you study them very closely, then we find some kind of attempt of the state to control Nadus. So which state would not like to control the units in the administration? So there is a question: why would they give autonomy to any kind of institution? So we find the king always wanted to centralize administration. And even in Tamil region also, we find the scholars have shown interest, have shown that the state appointed Nadu officials. As we mentioned, even Nata position was conferred on the Natas by the kings, as mentioned by Champakalakshmi. So we have this kind of evidence. So we cannot accept that Nadus were always autonomous. So we find at some point of time, of course, they were not autonomous. So that we can find here. And we find state allowed considerable autonomy to the Mahajans also. Mahajans are the leaders of Brahmana settlements. So Brahmana settlements or the Mahajans, they dominated social and economic activities. And these Brahmana settlements followed communal system of land ownership. So we find that large area of land given to Brahmins, maybe sometimes 100 Brahmins are given land, sometimes 1,000 Brahmins are given land. So we find large Brahmanical areas emerging. Of course, it's not given to single these individuals, but then we find like kind of agrara settlements. We can find that they have to give together. So if they wanted to sell, then it's a problem for them. So they cannot sell, but then they can obtain shares of their land, and also they can get the dividend or particular return from the profit from the agriculture production. So this is what we can find in the case of Brahmana settlements, which were kind of communal properties, which we can see, which we also see in the case of Goa. If you look at it, one of the earliest these kind of communal properties we find in Goa as early as 11th century under the Kadambas we find. So that is also there. Now, Brahmanas dominated village communities. If you look at Brahmanas, so we find that enjoying a lot of power because of the state royal patronage we can find. And also, this limited the power of the Nadus in the case of Karnataka. So even in the case of Tamil Nadu also, it should be the same. That how the Agraharas and Brahmana settlements, they were given a lot of support by the state. So it made the Brahmanas as more dominant and more important. And Mahajanas registered land transactions. They managed agricultural production of their land. They provided assistance to state in day-to-day administration. As we find inscriptions always mention the Brahmanas as a witness. Brahmanas are mentioned, so these Mahajans are also mentioned. So we find they are addressed with a lot of respect. So we find that the Brahmanas obtaining a lot of respect in that pre-modern society. So in that case, we find that so Nadus were being controlled by the state and also with the help of the Brahmanas. The major challenge faced by the Nargavunda and Urgavunda was the need to protect the cows and the women in the village in the Nadu. If you look at inscriptions, we find a lot of cattle race taking place. This we find in Tamil Nadu also. Even in the ancient time also, we find this particular kind of wars being fought. So we find the robbers and the thieves and the forest tribe. They called Bedas and Kirata. So we find Bedas are mentioned in this kind of attacks. So we find attacks by the forest tribes. So they used to attack these particular villages. And particularly when the state became weak, when the state was not very strong, or state would not give protection to the people of villages, and then we find that they used to fight wars, and some of the people in the village, they used to lose their lives also. So we find in this case the Gaundas becoming victims of attacks, and they had to sacrifice their lives for protection of their Nadu, which you can find in the inscriptions. large numbers of hero stones or viragals are found, so they confirm this particular trend. And hill chiefs also would attack people of the plains. So we find this kind of conflict between the hill chiefs and the plains. In fact, Hoysalas emerged because of this kind of conflict, and how Malapas is a hill tribe, but hill chiefs, how they were able to expand toward the plain, and we find they established a large kingdom and also an empire, we can say. Chieftains, they try to take advantage of absence of strong political power. So when there is lack of political power, so decline of the state. So during those days, we find chieftains were able to take advantage of this situation. Like as we find in the case of decline of Rajputas, and also when there was between the Cholas and Western Chalukyas. So those days, we find these chieftains used to attack these villages, and also they try to control them. So we find in that case, the Nadus needed support of the state. So without state support, Nadus would not leave, or they would not survive. We find many cattle wars, as we mentioned. So they try to lift village cows. So we find the cattle wars. This led to small kind of skirmishes, we can say. We find reference to death of Nalgawund and Urvodayasam. So in one instance, the Gawundas of 15 Adus, they rose in revolting in the political authority. So we find that Gawundas of 15 Adus, they rose in revolt against the state because, because state was not able to give protection to them against these kind of attacks. So cattle raids were happening. So these particular people, they wanted the protection of the state, so they rose in revolting against the state. Now the kings followed policy of separation between the Nadus, Mahajans, and self-governing and other self-governing institutions. So by creating this kind of various institutions, the kings were trying to limit the power of the Nadus. So it is not that Nadus were able to expand their power. And we also find presence of officials along with the Nadus, and consequently the state officials could cut a tendency among the Nadus to oppose the state authority. So the officials, as a part of the Nadu assemblies, and then they were able to curtail the power of the Nadus. The Nadus could not have or enjoy unlimited power as a kind of sovereignty. That is what we find in this case. So let me conclude. So come to the last part of my lecture. And so one would argue that Nadus benefited from the existence of strong states. So strong state becomes important because when you have the strong state, the state is able to give protection to the Nadus. So when the state is weak, and then in that case, the state cannot give protection to the Nadus. So this is my conclusion, or this is my argument. And we find that Nadu officials enjoy the right to decide some cases. But they did not enjoy complete autonomy from the state authority. So we cannot say that Nadus enjoy complete autonomy, or they were somewhat independent of the state authority, as argued by Bertenstein. So this is where I think we differ from Bertenstein's argument regarding the Nadus, and also their functions, and also their relationship with the state. And we find in the case of boundary disputes also the Nadus wanted king's intervention. So we have this kind of evidence coming up even from Tamil Nadu also. So we cannot say that Nadus were autonomous to that extent. Of course they were autonomous, but they did not have unlimited power. But they were always under the control of the state. So this is what I would try to argue today. Thank you.